you so much for joining us. We have such a wonderful treat in store today. We're here with Nancy Olnick and Giorgio Spanu, who are co-founders and managing trustees of Magazzino Italian Art. And if you've never been to Magazzino, I hope that if you take away one thing from the talk today, that you will be inspired to make the trip to just slightly over an hour north of New York City in Cold Spring, New York, to visit this amazing museum. Correct me if I'm wrong, but it is the only museum in the United States completely dedicated to Italian art.
Correct.
Is that right?
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So many of you may have been to Dia, many of you may have been to Storm King. This should be certainly on your list of things to visit in the Hudson Valley in the great state of New York. So we'll kick off today. I would love to, I'm actually going to turn to Nancy for the first question. So Nancy, you're a native New Yorker.
Correct.
And it's not every native New Yorker that becomes passionate and inspired to decide to collect post-war Italian art. It's a very specific focus. It's a passionate and interesting area. Can you tell us a little bit about how you discovered your interest for post-war Italian art? I feel like there might be a story there.
Well, first there came a very passionate interest in Italy. And I really would travel to Italy as much as I could, and just fell in love with the country, the people, everything. And I was fortunate, as everything in our lives developed kind of organically, that I was divorced, and a friend of mine who I went to high school with here in New York met Giorgio. And she called me and she said, you know, I met this Italian man, he wants to go out with you. And I said, why does he want to go out with me? She says, well, I showed him your picture. So I said, Wendy, what picture? She goes, you know, our high school yearbook. And I was like 40. So I said, oh, he's going to be very disappointed. But in fact, it clicked. It worked.
It worked.
And we were together. And on our first trip, Giorgio, we wanted to go. And he said, let's go to Paris. I said, I don't want to go to Paris. I want to go to Italy. So, of course, we started traveling to Italy. And interested, I was a collector prior to meeting Giorgio, mostly American pop art. And we wanted to know more about Italian art at the time. We met a lovely man who was a gallerist, and he said, go to Castello di Rivoli in Torino, and when you come back, we'll talk. So we did. We went to Castello di Rivoli, and there was an extraordinary Arte Povera exhibition at the time. We had knew nothing. We had never seen this work before. We didn't know Yannis Kounelis from Giulio Paolini to Michelangelo Pistoletto, nothing. And we were really, really amazed and enamored. And we went back to Rome, where we were living, and we started studying. And we started looking at work. And the more we learned about it, the more passionate we became, especially for me, because I was familiar with the 60s art in America, in New York, and Warhol and Lichtenstein and that, but to see the change, the difference in what the artists were doing in Italy in that time. Arte Povera really was coined by Germano Celant in 1967 when he did an exhibition at Galleria Bertesca in Genoa. And he was the one who put together kind of this group of artists, although they're always very independent. And so we started studying, and we were building a house in Garrison, which is 5 minutes from Magazzino, and we said, okay, only Italian art in Garrison. So we actually, the more we studied, we started to acquire more pieces. And for me, it was kind of my motto that I kept from business when I got my MBA is find a niche and fill it. Mm-hmm. So I always were very focused in collecting, or actually the first thing we were collecting together was 20th century Murano glass, which was just by chance. I had seen a piece and we acquired the piece, and I started taking the ball and running with that. And that also developed into a collection, nor did I ever look at it as a collection, because no one was really thinking about it in the 90s to buy this glass. And again, one thing led to another. And another friend of mine from high school, I went to a good high school in New York, called me, and she was director of the Museum of Arts and Design, the Craft Museum at the time, and asked me if she could do an exhibition of our Murano glass. So that started the ball rolling in putting together exhibitions and traveling them. And we got a lot of gratification out of sharing the work with others. That really resonated with us and stayed with us. And, you know, we're not the kind of people who want to keep things in storage. We want to share it with the public. It's what keeps us innovated and interested. And so we, after visiting back to Torino, we got, you know, more and more interested in Arte Povera, and
You got the bug.
we got the bug. And you know, collectors, when they get the bug, that's it. And we were also very fortunate along the way to meet an artist who was from Rome, who was represented by Galleria Stein in Milan. And he introduced us, and Gallery Christian Stein was really, really important to supporting these Italian artists in the 60s when really nobody was, you couldn't give it away. And she was an incredible woman who founded this gallery, named it after her husband. Her name was Margherita, but to get more credibility in the Italian art world. And we became very close to the gallery and were able to acquire some significant work from her personal collection.
Wow.
So that's got it going.
So
in a
many
serious
things
way.
coming up that are so relevant for TAFAF. I mean, I love that, first of all, that, you know, Arte Povera, that's not where you started. You started with Murano glass, and it kind of took you on a trajectory. Secondly, it seems like very organically maybe, built your network of relationships with different gallerists, with artists who made introductions, from whom you learned over the years, and that kind of helped you kind of evolve in your collecting. And then it's also kind of this meeting, this natural kind of middle ground, right, between your two cultures. You, with your background and your interest in the New York school, post-war American art, and Giorgio, I mean, of course, being from Italy. So Giorgio, how did your collecting interest evolve, and does your interest in Arte Povera, did that come from kind of a meeting in the middle, so to speak, between the two places you're from?
Well, before meeting Nancy, my interests were more towards European art. And Jean Dubuffet and Paul Klee were my favorite artists. I never really looked at American art the way Nancy looked at. But when I met her, I was exposed to her collection, and together we started the collection of Murano glass. That actually was our very first visit to Italy. And it was really something that we didn't know much about it. But just before taking that trip, we had gone to Sotheby's, one of the auction houses, to look at a sale that was coming up. And Nancy noticed a small hourglass, a clessidra by Paolo Venini, made in the 50s. And she asked me if I knew what it was. I said, absolutely, I don't know. But it must be something French, as they produce it so much. And the person at the auction house said, no, it's not French, it is actually Italian. It's Venini. It is made in Murano. I said, oh, my goodness, let's just stay away. For me, Murano were these little souvenirs that my aunts would purchase during their weekends in Venice and then offer to my mother, who would obviously hide it in the deepest drawer possible. So I didn't really have a very good image of Murano glass. But Nancy so insisted that we decided to place a bid. And on the way back from our skiing trip, we realized that we actually won the bid. And that was the first time that we bought something together, was this piece of glass that was made in Murano. Nancy went into the auction house to pick up the piece and came back and positioned the clessidra next to Andy Warhol flowers. The juxtaposition was just fantastic. These dynamic colors of Murano and these colors of Andy Warhol. I said, wow, this is something that I never really looked at in the same way. And I went for a business trip, I come back, and then Nancy had already acquired 700 works of Murano glass. We lived in a very minimal apartment. Not even ashtrays were allowed anywhere in the house, as we don't smoke. So the house was very minimal, with just very few paintings on the wall. And here we're starting this collection of glass. We take a trip to Italy, and on the flight, the in-flight magazine that Alitalia provided called Ulisse 2000, I noticed a very small ad advertising an exhibition of Murano glass by the Baroviers, l'Arte dei Barovier, in Palazzo Querini Stampaglia. Querini Stampaglia had been renovated by Carlo Scarpa, which I have always admired. So my interest was more seeing the Querini Stampaglia renovation by Carlo Scarpa than seeing the glass. So we decided to direct the driver to Venice, and with the intention to just take a look of the exhibition and continuing to Milan or wherever we were going for that trip. In fact, that made a big change in our lives, because not only we stayed for the weekend and bought our very first important piece of glass out of that exhibition. That started our collecting together. And as Nancy said, the next was our visit to Rome and the visit to Castello di Rivoli in Torino, which was a huge eye-opener. And the art fairs that we've been going. All the art fairs were very important to us, all of them. And all the exhibitions that we saw in various galleries, which I cannot thank enough, especially for the ones who are supporting Magazzino today. Christian Stein has been a big teaching for us, and Marion Goodman Gallery has supported our efforts very deeply, and we thank them for especially the exhibition that we have on view today, and other galleries that have supported our efforts are really important to Magazzino and to the support that we can get.
So a question that I always love to ask collecting couples or collecting families, because sometimes, but not always, collecting is done as part of a relationship. It's not usually kind of a unilateral decision that's made. What types of roles do each one of you play in your collecting decisions? So sometimes I've noticed with certain clients, one is more the aesthetic driver and one is the more focused on the business or the negotiations. Others have kind of slightly different but overlapping interests. How do you negotiate that? What are the kind of roles that you fall into as you're deciding what to collect and what you love?
We're very lucky. I'm very lucky because Giorgio and I have a very similar aesthetic.
Yes.
So I can't even really think of one piece that one of us said yes and the other one said no.
Yeah.
We really, it's instinctive. We're very lucky that way. I must say, I have to give Giorgio credit for doing all the archiving and following all of that part of the job. He really has a lot of patience and has that kind of brain that loves to archive and do all that. Me, I'm more the art, placing the art, installing exhibitions. That is what really gives me pleasure. But we're very in sync when it comes to choosing the art. And just back to the Arte Povera a second, for me, when we started, it was very interesting to me, the juxtaposition of, as I said, of what the artists were doing in New York in America and what the artists were doing in Italy. And they were both very rebellious, which really appealed to me, being a child of the 60s and the early 70s. So, but in such a different way. because, here it was more commercial and really, paying homage to commercial and advertising and all of that repetition and superstars and that kind. And in Italy, it couldn't have been more different. Arte Povera literally means poor art, and people take it as more of just using poor materials, which they do. Most of them just use found materials, except for someone like Luciano Fabbro, who also uses the most precious marbles and silk, but really for the most part. But more than the poor materials, they were really going down to just the basics of presenting the work, dealing with the economic downfall after the money that they were given in the 50s to rebuild the war, the Marshall Plan, thank you. And so they were really dealing much more politically and rebellious and really anti-art world, art market. They were not interested. They were very, very just in presenting the way we live, gravity, things that you don't see, much more in a way poetic, much more philosophical. And that juxtaposition was so different that it really was so fascinating to me to study. And you could study and study. We're very lucky, because one of the things that was very important to us when we did the original building was to create an educational center, a library. As much as we collected art, as we collected books and archival material over the years. And we, 2 years ago, when Germano Celant passed away, we dedicated and named the Germano Celant Research Center, which we're very proud of, because a lot of scholars and students and just people interested can come and peruse the material, which is very hard to get here.
Right.
It's and having that is really a luxury.
You normally have to travel to Italy, probably, do archival research.
Yes, and there are plenty of scholars here, and we do have a lecture series every year with a resident scholar that we fund for a year who does research there, and it's really wonderful, the work that's come out of that. So, as much as collecting the object, which, listen, it's great when you find a great piece of art that you love, but it's learning behind it. There's so much conceptual material to understand about Arte Povera that it keeps your interest, and we've been doing it for, I don't know, almost 30 years. So.
It's the object is a gateway into a moment in time, a culture of philosophy. I mean, do you think this is what, so now we are however many years later, 60, 70 years later, do you think that this kind of subversive or rebellious quality of Arte Povera is what resonates with audiences today? I mean, you must see all different types of people and different groups and individuals come through the museum every day. What is it that resonates with them about this particular category of art?
What resonates to them? I think before seeing what resonates into the visitors at Magazzino, I think we should say something about how we got to Magazzino and why Magazzino is there,
Please.
Which is a bit more, I think, important for me. It is thanks to the artists themselves that we're there, and in particular a group of artists that were part of an art program that we had established before Magazzino existed. The first artist we did not select. Actually, he selected us and offered to us to design and produce an artwork that was to be installed in the grounds of our home, which is 5 minutes away from where Magazzino is located today. At the beginning, I thought it was a very crazy idea. That's something that we really didn't want to pursue, but I was fascinated by the endurance of this artist, the way he really insisted and the way he found the location, how he was kind of trapped inside the property. Was during the when we lost the electricity, the blackout, so he was prisoner of this property, and he had nothing to do but walk around. And I had
code to the wine cellar.
Yeah.
So he wasn't that unhappy.
But he was prisoner of this property. And that actually gave us the idea of inviting an artist over and have him being prisoner of our lives and develop work that was then going to be part of our daily life. And the first artist that we selected is actually the same artist that was selected this year for the Venice Biennale, Massimo Bartolini. And actually Massimo developed Conveyance, which if any one of you saw the Biennale this year, a model of that is on view at the Biennale. So we're at the Italian Pavilion, yes. So we're very proud that started this 10 artists program. And at one point, we realized that we were having a lot of demand of visitors, especially students coming and see, and we had less and less room in the house for the collection by the time we had put together of Arte Povera. There we decided that we needed the right place to show the Arte Povera and the remaining of the collection, because we don't only collected Arte Povera in those years, we also collected the post-war Italian experience, La Scuola di Piazza del Popolo, Schifano, being one of them that is today on view at Magazzino. But for us it was important to really give a home of the collection to be shared with our friends. We had no intention to make a museum whatsoever. Our intention was to being able to have a place that was no longer our private home, which was getting to be a little bit too busy to having all these visitors. And we started looking for a location in the community that had given us the opportunity to raise 3 children and to be very happy. So it was our way of giving back to the local community. We were expecting them to be the first visitors of Magazzino. So for us, the reaction of the community was very important. How would they react to Arte Povera? Something that probably never had heard about, like us. And I believe that the reaction that Nancy and I had visiting Castello di Rivoli in an exhibition that had been curated by Rudy Fuchs is very much the same of the visitors that they come to visit Magazzino today. In Italian we say stupefazione. And is what I think is they don't expect to see that type of building in that region, in the middle of the woodlands of Putnam County, and they certainly don't expect to see this type of art when they hear Italian art. Of course, they think Michelangelo, Donatello, and all the classics. And the American seems not to be aware that we also have a contemporary art in Italy and young artists, and that is the mission of Magazzino. That is what we want. We wanted them to understand it through the post-war Italian art, that they also in Italy produce contemporary art. And the Italian contemporary artists really deserve to be exhibited more and more. Right. And this is what we intend to do in Magazzino. This is what I think is what people feel, that there is a home, not for the past, but for the present. That is my feeling.
But it is also very interesting to see the reaction of people when they come. When we opened in June of 17, Giorgio and I were standing there and like, who's going to come see this?
Opening day, here we go.
New York, like the doors are open, we're standing. But it is interesting to see the people's reaction. Particularly, we have a lot of artists who come and they say to us, we're inspired. I mean, it really brings out a strong reaction, even with children who sit there and draw and interpret it in their own way. But it's really interesting how it relates. For instance, one of the first exhibitions we did in the original building was Lucio Fontana, Alighiero Boetti, and Mel Bachner. And yes, and we met Mel, and Mel started regaling us with stories about Alighiero Boetti. So, to make a long story short,
so they knew each other.
They knew each other.
Okay.
Actually, Mel was more well known in Italy than he was in the United States at the beginning, and Saul LeWitt was much more well known in Italy. So it was interesting, and Mel had an idea to do this exhibition. We understood immediately how he connected to Boetti. Fontana was a little bit of a stretch with Mel's work in Boetti, so he told us this story that he was invited to the Fontana was a gallery who had bought the old Fontana studio, and the gallerist invited him to come and said, take whatever you want from the studio and make a piece of art. And Mel's very funny, and he's looking around like dirty paintbrushes, and there's nothing. And he sees this trunk in the corner. He goes, well, what's in that? And they open it up, and it's these pieces of glass called Catisi that is left over in Murano after they make the glass. It's stones of glass they threw away. And Fontana used it in his series of paintings called Venezia, and he would put these pieces of glass, I don't know if you've seen, within the piece, and Mel was inspired by this and used those stones to do a piece that was a take on the Pythagorean theorem. So we had that piece on the floor, and he curated the exhibition, and it's really doing that has inspired us, which is one of the reasons we wanted to build the new pavilion, is to spread out not just Italian art, not staying in that focus solely, but reaching out to other artists who were influenced, who contemporary young artists too. We get a lot of artists from Brooklyn who come and they're like, oh, it opens, it's not known here, which is why we said, let's do Arte Povera in New York, because it needed a venue to be exposed, which in the United States it hadn't been, as did we. And I was involved in the art world. I knew nothing about it until our first visit.
So it was important to you guys. I mean, you have such deep roots in the local community. A lot of collectors would think, okay, maybe it's a lot easier, it's less of a headache just to, if we wanted a home for the collection, to donate it to an existing museum. Maybe fund the creation of a new wing, that way that you're building onto an existing program and leveraging existing intellectual capital. But it seems like it was really important to you all to keep the art in the community that had been so good to you.
Absolutely. And we didn't start it as a museum. We just started, let's get an old warehouse where we can put these pieces, and it never occurred to us that it would become... This is why the name Magazzino. What it would come. Magazzino means warehouse in Italian. We had no idea that it would take on this, interest, and when we started doing more and more programming, I think that brought a lot of people. And believe me, the local community was very skeptical about us. Who are these? We were very low key and kept to it. Sure. Who was this? And these New Yorkers and art and bring here, and they were not the most welcoming. Now they are our greatest supporters. They are fabulous. They come to every event. It's really brought the community together in a way. I remember I heard one visitor saying, in Cold Spring, which is the size of this table, there's nothing. He goes, this is the new gathering place of Food Town. The grocery store where you would run into people. It's like, oh, now this is the new meeting place. So, it was nice that we could give back to this community.
Well, and that's one of, I think we spoke about this in a panel that we had in the same room this morning about the idea of an art fair or even a museum and the art world in general. It's more than being a marketplace. It's more than a place where people learn. It's really a meeting place. It's a place where people gather, where ideas are exchanged, where things happen. And it seems like that's really been at the core. It's kind of the agora, right?
Yes.
Of Magazzino's philosophy. But speaking of Magazzino's philosophy, I know that education has been a critically important part of the mission of the organization. So talk to us a little bit about what you do to carry out that objective.
Well, we have the intention to open a small educational center for the little ones. It's not open yet. Something that we have in progress. We have built it and reserved the space in the new Robert Olnick Pavilion that we recently inaugurated last September, but is not yet open. But we have a program for a scholar that is in residence for 1 year, and that scholar studies and produces usually a publication at the end of the year that spends with us, tied to the history of Italian art. And all the research gets done in our Germano-Celant Research Center. And that is very important for us, as is important educating the viewers also to the Italian culture in general. And who says Italy also says food. So our new cafe is, as today, is offering, as a part of the program that we have, the history of a plate, a specialty made in Milan. The chef is from Milan, and he came up with his idea of teaching people about the history of Italian food through a single dish from each region of Italy. The first one was about Bologna, the traditional lasagna. The second one was about Piedmont and Vitel Toné, which is a very big year also in Argentina. And today is presenting the riso al salto, which is a specialty from Milano that he gets done with the leftovers of the famous Milanese risotto. But it's not only inviting people to eat the specialties, about what Chef Luca is going to speak about the history of that, how the Italians have come to produce riso al salto. Why? There is a reason, because they were not to lose the leftovers from the day before. The risotto was always done in abundance, so this is how the plate has to become today, probably as famous as the risotto itself. And nobody really knows in America what the riso al salto is. So it's nice to educate also through the food and the style and many other things that Italy has to offer. So we don't want to do only the art of Italy, but the culture of Italy. What Italy has to offer. It's like, don't take an ITA flight to Rome. You can just take the MTA train and come to visit Magazzino, and you have a little portion of Italy right in the Hudson Valley.
Best coffee. There's only two places in America you can get this coffee, at Cafe Sylvia and at our daughter's restaurant in Boulder, Colorado, which is an Italian restaurant.
And what kind of coffee is it? I have to ask now.
So this is very important, and we have.
This is the most important.
But we have to thank our team and all the curators and the ones who have and are working, will be working in Magazzino, because without them, nothing would have been possible. And it's very important the work that they do, the passion, the commitment, to bring to America this little island of Italy. So this is what I will define Magazzino.
You know, one of the reasons we did build a new pavilion was to have a separate space for the younger children.
Yes.
But I must say, throughout the last 7 years, professors and high school have been bringing many classes to Magazzino. One professor every year comes and she teaches an Italian language class. And she says to them, pick out one piece and you'll go back and research it, and then we'll come back and you'll present your research speaking in Italian.
Oh,
and yeah, no. So in many different ways, they use the space to for language, for art, for a lot of different angles.
And so, I mean, the art is truly just a jumping off point into so many different topics: language, literature, culture, cuisine. The list goes on and on.
And our donkeys.
And the So tell us about what's the story behind the donkeys?
The story about the donkeys is very simple. When we moved to Phillipstown in the Putnam County, the idea was to have a weekend house where our children had to know that chickens also come with feathers, and they get to be served and grown in a certain way. So we created a little farm, and we started raising chickens and sheep, goats. And as I grew up in Sardinia, where donkeys were very important. They were the F-150 of the Sardinian farmers. We didn't have the pickup trucks, we had donkeys. Yeah. I did a research and found out that in the 1990s, merely 350 of them were left in the island, where thousands We estimated that there were about 38,000 before the downfall of the donkey in the end of 1960, where also our farmers start motorizing and buying tractors and using less and less the donkey. So I inquired about bringing 2 donkeys from Sardinia, and unfortunately it was impossible because the region had put strict rules on the export of them out of Sardinia as they wanted to rebuild the population. But I found out that some American gentlemen in the 1930s had brought over to America 18 Sardinian donkeys. So I traced the family and found out that they were living in Texas. And we purchased 2 of them, brought them to our farm, which is in a few minutes away from Magazzino. And then from them, we migrated them into Magazzino as an attraction for children. And I have to say, they are very highly appreciated. And the visitors get part into naming them. Each one of them that they born in the museum have a name starting with a D, as in donkey, so they all have these very creative names. As a matter of fact,
Arte, Donatello.
the last one apparently has been named Don Quixote. Don Quixote. I'm sure someone from Spanish origins had a lot to do behind pushing his name, and I believe he's been named with that name. So this is the history of the donkey. We love them, and the visitors love them, and especially the children. They're very friendly. We don't use them as a pickup truck.
No, okay.
So Magazzino is about the art, about the culture, about the donkeys, about the vegetable gardens. We try and it's really we use the land to, express Italian culture as much as we use the art. So now that we have a cafe and it's really a place you can linger, not just
visit for a couple of hours.
Exactly,
That's
for sure.
wonderful.
I'm sure you understand that Nancy has become more Italian than I am. I'm very proud because she's been recognized by President Mattarella as doing an advancement of Italian culture, and she was just bestowed the Cavaliere della Repubblica Italiana, which I'm very proud that she's...
What an honor.
Really. Never in my wildest dreams.
Wow. Nancy and Giorgio, thank you so much for visiting with us today.
Thank you.